When people talk about the sitcoms that once dominated television and became a defining memory for an entire generation, Friends almost always sits at the very top of the list. Jennifer Aniston became a beauty icon of the 90s through Rachel Green, while Matthew Perry turned Chandler Bing into one of the most beloved characters in sitcom history. Back then, the six friends at Central Perk seemed to have everything: youth, fame, laughter, and a future that audiences believed would always shine just as brightly. But behind that glow, real life eventually took turns no one expected. The man who made the entire world laugh would later admit that there were seasons of Friends he barely remembered filming because he was lost in addiction. And the woman once known as America's sweetheart suddenly found herself at the center of one of the most heavily scrutinized celebrity divorces in Hollywood. Looking back now, it becomes clear that the real lives of these stars turned out very differently from the warm memories the show left behind. So more than 30 years later, what really happened to the legendary cast of Friends? And do their lives today still resemble the memories millions of fans once believed would last forever? Let's turn back the clock and uncover the story behind the fame. Number 1. Matthew Perry. When people talk about Friends, it's almost impossible not to think of Matthew Perry. As Chandler Bing, he wasn't just funny. He had the kind of humor people never forget. The sarcasm, the timing, the awkward charm, the one-liners that fans are still quoting decades later. Chandler had all of it. But behind Chandler Bing's laughter, Matthew Perry was already fighting a battle that would later become one of the most heartbreaking stories connected to the Friends cast. Back in the 90s, when Friends was everywhere, Matthew Perry looked like someone who had hit the jackpot. The show turned him into one of the biggest television stars in the world, turned Chandler into one of the most beloved sitcom characters of all time, and gave him the kind of spotlight most actors can only dream about. From the outside, his life seemed almost perfect. He was rich, famous, adored by millions, and standing at the center of one of the most successful television series ever made. But how did the man who made the entire world laugh end up leaving behind one of the most heartbreaking stories connected to Friends? While millions of viewers were laughing with Chandler every Thursday night, Matthew Perry was quietly battling a growing addiction to drugs and alcohol. What later became one of the most talked about struggles connected to the Friends cast had actually begun during the very years when the show was at its peak. Perry himself later admitted that his addiction became so severe that there were entire seasons of Friends he barely remembered filming. That confession stunned many fans. Because on screen, Chandler Bing always seemed sharp, energetic, and quick with a joke. But in real life, Perry's world was becoming increasingly chaotic. He entered rehab multiple times, faced serious health complications linked to substance abuse, and often found himself trapped between the pressures of fame and the reality of his personal battles. The contrast was striking. The man who seemed to have the easiest laugh on television was quietly living through one of the hardest chapters of his life. Even after Friends ended in 2004, Chandler Bing remained one of the most beloved sitcom characters ever created. The show continued to find new audiences through reruns and streaming platforms, keeping Perry forever tied to the role that made him famous. But while Chandler seemed frozen in the carefree world of Central Perk, Perry's real life was far more complicated. Over time, he began speaking more openly about his struggles and even dedicated part of his life to helping people facing addiction, the same battle he had fought for years. In many ways, he tried to turn his own pain into something meaningful, using his voice to support others on the path to recovery. Then came the moment that changed everything. In October 2023, Matthew Perry passed away at the age of 54, and the news shocked fans around the world. For many people, it felt like losing a piece of Friends itself, because while Chandler Bing will always live on in reruns and streaming marathons, the man behind that unforgettable smile is no longer here. Number 2. Jennifer Aniston. If there was one character in Friends who instantly became a cultural symbol, it was Rachel Green. And with her, Jennifer Aniston quickly turned into one of the most recognizable faces of the 1990s. When the show first aired in 1994, Rachel's journey from a spoiled runaway bride to an independent woman trying to build a life in New York resonated with millions of viewers. But it wasn't just the story. It was Aniston herself. The hair, the fashion, the charm, the timing in both comedy and emotion. The Rachel haircut alone became a global trend, copied by women everywhere and talked about in salons around the world. At the height of Friends, Jennifer Aniston wasn't just a TV star. She was a cultural phenomenon.
There you go.
Thank you. What a bitch.
When the show ended in 2004, many people wondered whether any of the cast could escape the shadow of their characters. For Aniston, the answer seemed clear. She transitioned into Hollywood films with remarkable consistency, starring in comedies and dramas that kept her firmly in the spotlight. Movies like Marley and Me, The Breakup, and Horrible Bosses proved that she wasn't just Rachel Green. She had the ability to carry major box office projects and remain one of the most bankable actresses of her generation. But while her career continued to thrive, her personal life often became the center of public attention in ways she never seemed to seek. Her marriage to Brad Pitt in the early 2000s turned them into one of the most famous couples in the world. When their divorce in 2005 became front-page news across the globe, the story quickly turned into one of Hollywood's most talked-about celebrity breakups. For years afterward, the media narrative often framed Aniston through the lens of that relationship, sometimes overshadowing the work she continued to do on screen. Over time, however, something interesting happened. Instead of fading into nostalgia like many television stars of the 90s, Jennifer Aniston quietly reinvented her place in Hollywood. Her role in The Morning Show brought her back to television with a performance that earned major critical recognition and reminded audiences that she could still command the screen decades after Friends first aired. Today, Jennifer Aniston remains one of the few actors from that era who never truly disappeared from public view. Yet the contrast is still there. The young woman who once represented the carefree spirit of the 90s has grown into a far more private, reflective figure, someone who still carries the legacy of Rachel Green, but no longer needs to live in its shadow. And in a strange way, that may be the most surprising part of her story. Number 3. David Schwimmer. There's a question many Friends fans still wonder about today. What actually happened to Ross Geller after the show ended? Back in the 1990s, Ross was everywhere. As the awkward but lovable paleontologist, David Schwimmer helped create some of the most iconic moments in Friends. His relationship with Rachel became one of the central storylines of the entire series, and the line, "We were on a break," eventually turned into one of the most quoted phrases in sitcom history. At the peak of the show's success, Schwimmer was also one of the highest-paid actors on television, earning around $1 million per episode in the final seasons, just like the rest of the main cast. But unlike some of his co-stars, Schwimmer didn't chase the same kind of Hollywood spotlight after Friends ended in 2004. Instead, he gradually stepped away from big blockbuster roles and focused more on work behind the camera. What many viewers don't realize is that Schwimmer spent a lot of time directing and working in theater, especially with the Looking Glass Theater Company in Chicago, where he had actually started his career long before Friends made him famous. Younger audiences might recognize his voice as Melman, the giraffe in the Madagascar animated films, a role that quietly became one of the most commercially successful projects of his career. Years later, he surprised viewers again with a very different role in The People v. O.J. Simpson, playing Robert Kardashian and showing that his acting range went far beyond the character of Ross Geller. Today, Schwimmer's career looks very different from the fame he had in the 1990s. He appears less often, chooses projects more carefully, and mostly stays away from the constant celebrity spotlight that once surrounded the cast of Friends. And in many ways, that seems to be exactly the life he chose. Number 4. Matt LeBlanc. For many fans, Joey Tribbiani was the heart of Friends. The charming but not-so-bright actor with the unforgettable line, "How you doin'?" quickly became one of the most beloved characters on the show. Matt LeBlanc played Joey with a mix of confidence, innocence, and perfect comedic timing that made the character instantly memorable. During the peak of Friends, Joey wasn't just comic relief. He became a pop culture icon, and LeBlanc was suddenly one of the most recognizable faces on television. But once Friends ended in 2004, his path became one of the most unpredictable among the 6 stars. NBC tried to continue Joey's story with the spin-off series Joey, hoping the character could carry the same success on his own. Instead, the show struggled with ratings and was canceled after 2 seasons. For a while, it felt as if LeBlanc had quietly stepped away from the spotlight. He later surprised audiences with a very different comeback in the series episodes, playing a fictionalized version of himself. The role earned him a Golden Globe and reminded viewers that he had far more range than the lovable Joey people remembered. In recent years, LeBlanc has kept a much lower profile. After hosting Top Gear and starring in the sitcom Man with a Plan, he gradually stepped away from regular television work. Today, he appears rarely in public, choosing a quieter life away from Hollywood's constant spotlight. Yet no matter how much time passes, one thing remains certain. For millions of fans around the world, Matt LeBlanc will always be Joey, the friend who could walk into a room, flash that smile, and instantly make everyone laugh. Number 5. Lisa Kudrow. Among the 6 friends, Phoebe Buffay always felt a little different. While the others were navigating careers, relationships, and everyday struggles in New York, Phoebe often seemed to live in her own strange, unpredictable world. With her quirky personality, offbeat humor, and songs like "Smelly Cat," Lisa Kudrow created a character that became one of the most unique figures in sitcom history. During the height of Friends, Phoebe wasn't just comic relief. She was the unpredictable spark that could turn an ordinary scene into something unforgettable. When Friends ended in 2004, many wondered whether Kudrow would continue chasing the same kind of mainstream fame as some of her co-stars. Instead, her career took a quieter but surprisingly creative direction. Rather than focusing only on big studio projects, she began working behind the scenes as a producer and developing smaller, more unconventional shows. Over the years, she has continued to appear in films and television, often choosing roles that lean more toward character work than traditional leading parts. Today, Lisa Kudrow remains one of the most respected comedic performers from the Friends era, someone who never tried to repeat Phoebe Buffay, but quietly built a career that moved in its own direction. Number 6. Courteney Cox. If there was one apartment in Friends that felt like the center of the universe, it was Monica Geller's. And if there was one person holding that world together, it was Courteney Cox. Monica wasn't just another sitcom character. She was intense, competitive, sometimes neurotic, but also deeply loyal and full of heart. Whether she was obsessing over cleanliness, battling Ross in ridiculous sibling rivalries, or slowly building one of the show's most beloved relationships with Chandler, Cox gave Monica a kind of emotional grounding that helped balance the chaos around her. But unlike some of her co-stars whose careers shifted dramatically after the 90s, Cox's path moved in a quieter but steady direction. She stepped back from the constant spotlight of network television and began building a different kind of career. Many viewers remember her leading role in the comedy series Cougar Town, which ran for 6 seasons and showed a looser, more confident side of her comedic timing. At the same time, another franchise quietly kept her connected to audiences across generations, the Scream films. Decades after first appearing as reporter Gale Weathers in 1996, Cox still returns to the role, making her one of the few actors who has stayed with the same horror franchise for nearly 30 years. Today, Courteney Cox represents something slightly different from the other Friends stars. She may not dominate headlines the way she once did, but she has remained present, working steadily, evolving quietly, and proving that sometimes longevity in Hollywood isn't about chasing the spotlight, but knowing how to stay in the story. Number 7. Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd didn't appear in Friends from the beginning, but by the time he arrived as Mike Hannigan, Phoebe's charming and slightly awkward love interest, he quickly became part of the show's world. His calm, understated humor was very different from the louder personalities in the group, which made the character surprisingly memorable in the final seasons. At the time, Rudd was already working steadily in Hollywood, but few people would have predicted just how much bigger his career would become years later. While many actors from 90s sitcoms gradually faded from the spotlight, Paul Rudd's trajectory went in the opposite direction. He became a major presence in modern Hollywood, especially after joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Scott Lang, better known as Ant-Man. The role introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans. Today, Rudd stands in an unusual position among the extended Friends cast. The man who entered the story late, but whose career continued rising long after the series had ended. Number 8. James Michael Tyler. Not every memorable character in Friends sat on the famous orange couch. Some stood quietly behind the coffee counter. And for years, that was exactly where audiences found Gunther. With his unmistakable blonde hair and silent devotion to Rachel, James Michael Tyler turned what could have been a background role into one of the most recognizable side characters in the entire series. Gunther rarely took center stage, but his awkward expressions, dry one-liners, and long-running crush on Rachel became part of the charm that fans still remember today. What many viewers didn't realize is that Tyler originally worked as an extra on the show, chosen partly because he knew how to operate an espresso machine. Yet over time, Gunther slowly evolved into the 7th most recognizable face in the Friends universe. Years after the show ended, Tyler revealed that he had been quietly battling advanced prostate cancer. He passed away in 2021 at the age of 59. For many fans, it was a reminder that even the characters who stood quietly in the background had become part of the emotional fabric of the show. Number 9. Maggie Wheeler. If there was one voice in Friends that fans could recognize instantly, it was
Janice?
Oh my God!
That unmistakable laugh and the drawn-out, "Oh my God," turned Maggie Wheeler's character into one of the most unexpected scene stealers in the entire series. Janice was never meant to stay long, yet she kept returning season after season because audiences simply couldn't forget her. But while Janice remained frozen in sitcom history, Maggie Wheeler quietly moved on from the spotlight. In recent years, she has appeared only occasionally on television and now spends much of her time teaching acting and voice work. The woman behind one of TV's loudest laughs ended up choosing a much quieter life. Number 10. Tom Selleck. Long before Friends became a cultural phenomenon, Tom Selleck was already a television legend. Yet when he appeared as Dr. Richard Burke, Monica's sophisticated and much older love interest, he brought a completely different energy into the show. Richard wasn't loud or chaotic like the rest of the group. Instead, his calm confidence and quiet charm made the character stand out immediately, and for many fans, he became one of the most memorable recurring roles in the entire series. At the time, Selleck was already famous from earlier television hits, but his appearances on Friends introduced him to a new generation of viewers. Years later, while many actors from the era slowly stepped away from television, Selleck remained remarkably active. He went on to star in the long-running crime drama Blue Bloods, where he played New York Police Commissioner Frank Reagan for over a decade. Today, Tom Selleck represents a rare kind of longevity in Hollywood, an actor whose presence has quietly spanned multiple generations of television audiences. Looking back at the cast of Friends, it becomes clear that time doesn't move the same way for everyone. Some continued to rise, some quietly stepped away from the spotlight, and some left behind memories that fans will never forget. Yet no matter where life took them, these faces remain tied to a show that shaped an entire generation of television. And perhaps that's what makes revisiting them so powerful. It's not just about the actors, but about the memories we shared watching them. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more stories behind the shows you grew up with.